Welcome back to Drawn to Darkness, a bi-weekly podcast where we discuss our favorite movies, TV shows, podcasts, books, and stories that are dark, scary, and twisted. My name's Annie, and I'll be discussing my favorite horror.
My name's Caroline, and I'll be discussing my favorite true crimes.
Okay. I want to ask you, if someone you admired was involved in something awful, would you rather it came out into the open or keep it hidden? So, for example, if someone on your laminated list, a Paul Rudd or an Obama, were actually serial offenders in some way, would you rather that information come out?
Funny you should mention my laminated list because I have removed someone for their transgressions, ethical transgressions. So yeah, out in the open for sure. Nothing gets solved in the closet or in the dark.
We should explain what the laminated list is. This is, again, I'm sorry, 90s references on Friends when they made a 5 people they could cheat with.
Yeah, your passes.
So your 5 passes if you run into this person. And Ross runs into
Isabella Rossellini.
Isabella Rossellini, yes. And she was cut from his laminated list, so he doesn't get the pass. Great episode, but we all have our laminated list.
Yes, mine's on my Google Keep.
Yeah, mine's in a note on my phone. I think about this with the likelihood that there are some Democratic politicians that likely did something awful, in relation to what Jeffrey Epstein did on his horrible pervert island. And, there's certain people that are probably implicated. And I want them to fall. I don't care what it does to the Democratic Party. I don't care.
I do feel like that has been a distinction between the parties here in America, where there's one party where when someone has a transgression, they lose their seat or they lose their support. In another, everyone just rallies behind and either gaslights or says it doesn't matter for the greater good, which is also something that is reflected in this movie.
Not only does it not matter, I think it's become a source of pride for some of them. That's another story. I think about this a lot with the Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky thing. I know some people who were so caught up in the Penn State football fan identity. That was such a part of their lives. And so when Joe Paterno, this admired, venerated icon, was the one who let it happen, it was really hard for them to let go of that.
Like, I get that it's hard. And even if it's not about a person, I was a big football fan. I was in several fantasy leagues. And then news reports came out about the percent of people who have ever played football that get CTE, and I can't watch it anymore. I think something just clicks for me where it loses that element of joy immediately.
So that brings us to what we're talking about today, which is the movie Spotlight. I just want to remind everyone that there will be spoilers. Go and watch it and come back. And also, last week we discussed whether or not we should include trigger warnings. And there is definitely discussion of sexual abuse of children in this episode. So take care if that is going to be triggering for you. And also, if you're super Catholic, you might want to skip this one too. Mom, if you become a fan, I'm going to say some bad stuff about Catholicism. So if that's going to be a problem, skip this episode.
Me too, Bill, if you're listening. I still want to be your Caroline. Okay.
Bill doesn't care.
Okay.
Nancy cares. Can I tell you something about Bill? When I was a kid and my mom would make me go to church and I was a teenager, so sometimes the times I could go didn't align with, when my mom could go. And so the rule was that I just had to go on my own. And my dad would say, you don't really have to go. You can just go sit somewhere else.
I love you, Bill.
Bill will be fine.
And I should also disclose, I was not raised Catholic. So Annie was, I was not. My mom was a lapsed Catholic. Yeah.
There are many of them.
Okay, so with a whopping 97% Rotten Tomatoes rating and over an 8 on IMDb, Tom McCarthy's Best Picture winning film Spotlight is the true story of how the Boston Globe uncovered the massive scandal of child molestation and cover-up within the Boston Archdiocese and beyond, really. It starts with reporting on the crimes of Father Gagan, a priest with 86 accusations of sexual abuse, but focuses on how these dedicated journalists in the team called Spotlight uncovered more than just the sexual abuse of a few so-called bad apples, but a web of lies, cover-ups, and legal manipulations to keep that abuse a secret.
Quite a movie. Did you know that the director, Tom McCarthy, is the same guy who played the journalist in season 5 of The Wire?
No
Scott
way.
Templeton?
I just got chills.
Yeah. It's him. He's the dishonest one who's making up stories and sources. I know that season gets a lot of criticism, but I still love those newsroom scenes and the character Gus. But yeah, I listened to an interview with Tom McCarthy on a podcast called Awards Chatter from back in February 2016, shortly after this was released. He also directed The Visitor.
No.
Have you seen that? It's a beautiful movie with Richard Jenkins, who plays the voice of Stipe.
Yes, the dad from Step Brothers.
And Tom McCarthy co-wrote the script to Up.
No.
Yeah. And he directed the Game of Thrones pilot.
Wow.
So what a guy.
Yeah, mind blown.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Okay. So what adjective would you use to describe this?
Devastating.
I would describe it as appalling.
Absolutely.
In terms of its value as a film, I found it both riveting and understated. I think it's so well done. How they managed to make a bunch of people who are essentially looking through a phone book of priests, like riveting, right? Like that painstaking pre-internet effort required to go through this information and figure out what was going on. How did they make that exciting? But they did.
I mean, I do think some of that is the whole they're being cut off at every turn. And like, it's natural for a journalist to be like, what are you trying to hide from me? There's clearly a cover up here, and why, and how big is the cover up? But you're right. I was just looking at them going through those reasons for priests being moved and stuff like that, and thinking about, oh my gosh, what a painstaking process that is. And it is still so exciting the whole time.
And just in general, I love any kind of investigation story. Often with true crime, or fictional crime, it's from the detective's perspective. But I love a journalism story, and I feel like there aren't enough of them out there. I love their depiction about how dedicated they are and they're truth seekers. And, you know, I think about my Uncle Bill, who wrote under W. Zachary Malinowski for the Providence Journal. He was an investigative journalist. You may have heard of him if you've listened to the podcast Crime Town, which is dedicated to him because he was involved in that and he died while they were making that. That's the same makers of The Jinx.
Yes, love it.
Yeah. And my aunt was a photographer for the Journal. And I've actually been talking to her about this. She photographed one of the victims for the Providence Journal. So she's been slightly involved with this investigation. And I always think back to one of my favorite days as a kid was when my aunt took me to the Providence Journal for Take Your Daughter to Work Day. Did you do Take Your Daughter to Work Day? Was that a thing at your school?
Might have been at my school, but not at my mom's office. So no.
Yeah. Well, my mom was a teacher at my school, so Take Your Daughter to Work Day was not really going to work with her. But my aunt took me to the Providence Journal, and it was awesome. We went and photographed I probably shouldn't say this is awesome, but someone had died by suicide on a bridge, and we went and photographed that, and I got to see behind the scenes. I saw the dark room. But mostly what I remember is that magic of the newsroom, which most of us only get to see in movies, and just kind of all these people on desks, and they're all, you know, just exactly what you see in the movies. And I found this. It was in a review of Spotlight by a journalist. It's a New York Times article. It captures the finer grain of newsroom life in the early years of this century almost perfectly, starting with a scene in which a retiring veteran is sent off with awkward speeches, forced laughter, and dry cake. As the story unfolds, there are scenes of pale-skinned guys in pleated khakis and button-down Oxfords, gathering under fluorescent lights and ugly drop ceilings. Spasms of frantic phone calling and stretches of fidgety downtime. Not even the raffish presence of Mad Men bad boy John Slattery can impart much glamour to these drab surroundings. Visually, the movie is about as compelling as a day-old coffee stain, and as I said, almost perfect. And I thought that really described well that feel.
Yeah, totally. And also, I always appreciate, I think there's a tendency in media, especially if it's not a straight-up documentary, to create good guy, bad guy, and this dichotomy of like right and wrong. And I've been at several companies that have been acquired, and I very much was in touch with the feeling of there's a new boss here, and they don't know us, and they don't know our culture, and they don't seem to care, and what are they going to cut, and is it going to matter? And I really appreciated the journey of the relationship between Liev Schreiber's character and the rest of the Spotlight team and John Slattery, everyone trying to come to the understanding that they might be coming from different angles of this, but everyone's trying to do a good job and has the same ethics in mind in the end of the day.
I love Liev Schreiber's character, Marty, because they point him out as an outsider, that he doesn't even like baseball. Like, that's a real sign that you're not a
And he's Jewish.
Bostonian, right? And he's Jewish. Yeah, and I love the subtle and not so subtle ways that they show how deeply Catholicism is embedded in Boston society, whether it's Rachel McAdams' character, Sasha, still going to church with her grandma, or mentioning that 53% of their subscribers are Catholic, the way the churches are kind of always looming over them, the old boys networks from these private Catholic schools. They're all Catholic. They all went to Catholic schools. And even, whether or not a lawsuit will succeed depends on which parish the judge belongs to.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched this, that aspect of it was very jarring for me because even though I'm from New England, I'm from Greater New York, and New York City is not a Catholic city. And I am not used to this level of Catholicism being this, like you said, looming presence, that you would have a meeting with the archdiocese, which I also have no sense of the levels of these people and their titles and how much they matter or whatever, but that Cardinal Law, I think, meets with him and that it's customary. I'm like, what? In New York, it would be insane. You would have to meet with a million different leaders of different religious sects, for every publication also, which there's so many of. So yeah, that was a very shocking aspect for me. And it also really drove home that element of this uphill climb they have to get this story out there, to uncover it at all, and then to actually be able to put it in print and send it out to the readers.
That's a great scene, the way he talks about how great institutions need to work together. And Marty's like, nah, I don't think so. And then he gives him a catechism, power move.
I love all the power move elements. I actually have a note here about when he goes to the Catholic Charities event and he's not on the list. And then that dude appears and he's like, it's okay, I've got you, Baron. And then they have this underhanded thing that same guy says later to Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton's character, about Baron. This guy's going to leave this area just like he did in Miami and just like he did in New York. And where are you going to go? It's like the mafia.
It is like the mafia. And I actually remember when I got in a fight with my mom. It was probably back when I was listening to Crime Town, because that's all about the mafia. And I made a comment that the Catholic Church is like the mafia, because in Crime Town, they talk about how the mafia do a lot of good too, right? The Catholic Church does do a lot of good, right? That's not untrue, but they also do a lot of bad, and they are powerful and manipulative and have a lot of money, and they have unfortunately used it to do some pretty insidious, awful things. I have to tell you something that I found out while watching this movie, and it was really hard for me not to tell you this earlier. So as I'm watching this, I started thinking about the priests I've known growing up, and just out of curiosity, I Googled them. And my childhood priest, who was always on the playground, beloved, right? We all loved him. He was so nice and friendly, is on the list of roughly 50 priests who have been credibly accused of sexual assault in the Providence Archdiocese. So my priest.
I mean, I would like to say that I'm shocked. But, we should say we met at a Jesuit college. Most of our friends grew up going to private Catholic schools. Our college was their first co-ed experience for a lot of them. And I do remember having friends who, when this article came out, their childhood priests were also on lists, etc. And as far as we know, none of them had personally been involved. But again, it is so jarring when he says 6% of all priests is the estimate. And I was Googling what is the percent that have been credibly accused, and it's like 4%. And then you have to think about the underreporting of sexual assault in general. And there's a wonderful scene with the guy who has the classic 2000 white horizontal striped jacket on. He's the first victim, I think, that they speak to. And he's talking about in a poor neighborhood when the priest is showing you attention, it's like God is visiting. Like I said, I did not grow up Catholic. In the faith that I grew up, every individual communicated directly to God equally. So I really could not relate to a lot of this, but I totally understand this hierarchy element, and it's explained beautifully in this movie.
Well, yeah, I definitely grew up with the necessity for deference to priests. But guess what I did to this priest?
Oh, tell.
I puked on him. I puked on him. I did. When I was in kindergarten or first grade, it's one of my most vivid, embarrassing memories, because I remember I was on the playground. He was always on the playground. And I remember there was this girl, Francesca, and she was showing him her Barbie doll. And I was standing there, and he turned to me, and he must have noticed that I didn't look well. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I vomited all over his shoes. And the Barbie doll.
Good for you.
So, yeah, well, he got that at least. He did die before the accusations came out. So there will be no closure with him. And I asked my mom, did you know? And she did know that there was an accusation, but didn't know any details about what he was accused of. I did find there's some website that lists where he served. And in the 60s and 70s, he moved around, 5 years here, 3 years there, 7 years there, that kind of thing. And then he was at my church for like 20 years. So he didn't move for a long time in his elderly years, but I don't know. I mean, it tracks that something happened. I have another story of a relative who was a nun until her 40s, and she left, and I would say is pretty bitter about the Catholic Church, even though she's still a faithful person, because she lost a lot to that time. And we were going through the process of getting my daughter confirmed, which I know sounds probably crazy given the way I'm talking about Catholicism, but she wanted to get confirmed, and I figure there's no better way to drive her into the arms of the church than to forbid it. So we were going through the process, and one of the things we had to do was go to church every week for like a 2-month period, which was tough for me. But we were going away this weekend, and I told the priest we won't be able to go to Mass, and he was giving me a hard time. And he was saying, you should go to Mass wherever you're going, right? And we were going up like kind of camping in a mountain, and we would have had to drive like an hour down. And I was like, it's not realistic that we can go. And anyway, I was complaining to this relative who was a former nun, and she said to me, you should just forge the priest's signature on the Mass card. And I was like, okay, I grew up with way too much Catholic guilt to not only lie about going to Mass, but to cover up that lie by forging a priest's signature. I was like, I can't do that. And she says, you don't owe them anything.
True.
Wow. What did you experience as a nun to have that take now?
Yeah, sorry, can I ask a question? What is a Mass card?
Basically, as the process of getting confirmation, it was like, you have to go to these, 8 Masses, and you had to get the priest to sign off that you were present. So it was proof. They have you, in their clause for that like 8 weeks or whatever while you prepare for confirmation, and then you never go to church again, which is what we did.
Right. So. Which, like I will say, like, I grew up actually very religious. I started in college with the intention to be a theology major. I really, really related to Mark Ruffalo's character when he talked about his relationship with the church and how he was so angry. Like, he really felt like he was going to find his way back there at some point, and now he can't, and I very much connected with that because for a series of reasons, none of which are individually traumatic in any way, I'm at that same place. And it is sad. It is devastating to have something that was a place of comfort for you and some place that really meant a lot to you as you were growing up to become an unsafe place. But like we were saying at the beginning, you can't just sweep things under the rug and then go on with a strong face pretending like it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, I think arguably this scandal is what turned a lot of people away who were maybe already moving away. But it's still obviously a wealthy, powerful entity. We've just had a conclave, which has kind of brought a lot of attention to the Catholic Church. And I think people are still religious. Like evangelical churches, though, I think are filling that gap. But I think about that scene in Seinfeld. Here comes another 90s reference, where George is looking for a job and he fakes Vandelay Industries. And he's given Jerry's phone number to call, right? And then Kramer picks up the phone and is like, Vandelay Industries, what are you talking about? And George, lurches out of the bathroom, his pants down. He's like, say Vandelay, say Vandelay. And then he's lying on the ground, pathetic, with his pants around his ankles. And Jerry says, and you want to be my latex salesman. I think about that with the Catholic priests. And you want to be my moral compass? You want to tell me what to do when you did that? How dare you? Even if you are a good one, you didn't sexually abuse anyone, you let your colleagues get away with it. And anyone who was around at this time, if they knew about it and they kept their mouth shut, they are morally compromised and have lost that right to tell me how to behave and threaten me with hell.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I am, in quotations, godmother to 2 Catholic boys, which it's not on paper because the church does not accept me. I'm a heathen. But I went through the ceremonies, etc. And before that, I was a bridesmaid in a wedding of a friend of ours who was Catholic. They went through the whole pre-Cana situation, the classes you're supposed to do in order to get married by a priest.
I didn't get married by the Catholic Church. I got married in the Church of Spiritual Humanism, which was very disappointing for my mother.
I got married I got married by my brother, so who had an online whatever, so, like Joey, having and receiving and all that. Yeah, so I was laughing. I mean, I think one of the first disappointments I had with the Catholic Church was this friend got married very young, and she had been living with her now husband, lying to the priest during all the pre-Cana ceremonies about whether they were living together. And then we get to the rehearsal, and they're like, when you come up to get communion, if you're not Catholic, you still walk up here, make appearances like you're not a heathen. But just walk by. Don't have our body and blood of Christ, our disgusting wafer, etc. Just walk on by and sit down. And then he continued on, and our friend interrupted and was like, Caroline, did you hear that? And I was like, yeah. Like, I get it. And then the morning of the wedding confessed to having been lying to the priest the entire time about them living together, and she was able to take communion at the ceremony. And I was like, I do not understand the logic here. This makes no sense.
Yeah, there's not a lot of logic. Well, let's talk about setting. Boston. I'm a Rhode Island girl. We're more than just a suburb of Boston, but I have so much nostalgia for Boston. So I love seeing the Boston street scenes. I love the scene at Fenway. It brought me back to nostalgia for the time I actually paid attention to the Red Sox before I moved to Australia and stopped following. But when they were talking about like Pedro, I was like, oh, yay, I know that name.
Yeah, I was a Mike Lowell fan when I was following baseball.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I love Boston. I love the charm of Boston. I wanted to live in Boston. I almost did. What did you think of the Boston accents?
Actually, I thought they were pretty understated. I don't think they leaned into Boston accents the way so many actors do horrible Boston accents.
Yeah, I thought some of them were good and some of them were really bad. Like, just don't try.
That is like a prerequisite for making a movie set in Boston is some actor with a bad Boston accent. Yeah. I think the timing is important. This was in 2002. So in that sort of pre-internet era where print journalism was still a big thing before the 24-hour news cycle, which, made this sort of journalism more difficult, but also at the same time it was more valued and respected. So really seeing the start of the decline of print journalism, which is alluded to with cuts and one newspaper buying out another, and a major aspect of season 5 of The Wire as well.
Yeah, I think to that point, what I was saying earlier about the new boss, you definitely get the sense at the beginning that this new boss is going to prevent them from taking more time, from taking the time they need. He reacts to how long it takes them to work on a story, and he talks about readership, etc. And at first you're nervous that he's not going to be supportive, but then it's like he just keeps doubling down on the importance of this story. And you're suddenly like, oh, he's not cutthroat. He's just trying to be logical and responsible, I guess, in the reality they're living in.
He was a great character. And I thought Liev Schreiber played him so well. And what did you think of Mark Ruffalo as Mike Resendez?
I never have I ever not loved a Mark Ruffalo performance.
I know you love him. Is he on your eliminated list?
Don't find him attractive. I just think he's great. I mean, much like my number one note here, Stanley Tucci always understands the assignment. I love him. I will watch him do anything, anytime. He is not on my list.
I do prefer bald Stanley Tucci.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's crazy because I've seen him do so many. He's such an amazing character actor. He really is.
He is. Yeah. Speaking of haircuts, Mark Ruffalo's haircut was kind of stupid too.
He does not look his best. And it's interesting, the whole element of his marriage. They sort of are like, are you married? Does your wife? And I remember being like, wait, he's married because he's constantly working. And then when John Slattery visits him with the pizza or whatever, he's like, how long are you going to be in this dump? And it's like, oh, his marriage is on the rocks. Like something's going on here. And I love when movies take the time but don't belabor the fact that these people have lives that are impacting them and they're still dedicated to making this happen.
Yeah, he really plays that role with a tortured intensity, which makes sense that his marriage would break up because he is devoted to what he's doing. You can see that kind of, I don't know, he's like jittery the whole time.
He does tortured very well.
He does tortured very well, yes,
Yeah.
in many movies. What did you think of McLeish, the lawyer representing the victims who's kind of complicit with the Catholic Church? Or is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy?
I have chills actually now because you think he's just a straight up douche. And I also was like, how do I know this guy? And he's Russell from Almost Famous, which is such a different character. But yeah, you're spending all of this time being like, what a dick, man. And then he's like, I sent this shit to you guys. I really thought that too, that element of Rachel McAdams finding the clip and them all talking about the parts they all played in not getting this out in the open sooner. It's really just a wonderful reflection of everyone being human.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us to Michael Keaton's character, Robbie. And that was such a surprise for me that he was the one who kind of buried the story. I always thought it was going to be John Slattery's character. Like, he seemed to be the one who was kind of resistant. And I feel like there's this real sense of atonement in his character, that he is trying to make up for his past mistakes. And it was a mistake, but ultimately he did the right thing.
I was also really impressed by all of his pushback of the people in his world, the people in his whole world, like people he's known since high school, where he continued to, like, once his eyes had been opened, they were going to stay open and he was not going to back down.
Yeah, I imagine it takes a lot of strength of character to stand up to your powerful political golf buddies. And I thought Rachel McAdams did a great job. I did listen to this podcast, I can't remember what it was called, where it actually interviewed some of the Globe reporters and talking about how dedicated these actors were to getting them right and how much time they spent with them and the questions they asked, and that they were all just really impressed by the actors. So I'm so glad that she started in Mean Girls as like a fun teen movie and is now this really serious actor. So
I love her too in everything I've seen her do. But I really was also just thinking about being in her shoes when she's talking to these victims and trying to push for more details. And when she talks to the priest, the older guy, and she's just like, okay, so you admit it? I could never imagine being as strong as any of these people are, to be honest.
Would you say that was the most chilling scene where she talks to that priest and he's just like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that he's like, you need to understand I didn't enjoy it. Like, that makes it okay somehow. It just was so appalling, just unbelievable.
Yeah. I love that scene because then she walks out and she looks on the street and there's kids riding their bikes by and a church. No, not, I think a school bus, a school looming over. And what I love about this movie is she doesn't even say anything. She just subtly turns around and looks back at his house and everything is clear. Like, they don't over-explain to the audience. The acting makes it clear.
Yeah, and similarly, that other guy, the mustache guy who doesn't get enough time, I don't know his name.
Matt Carroll. I looked it up because he talks about writing a horror movie, a horror book at some point. So I was like, oh, I want to look that up. But I couldn't really find it.
So he looks up that address and it's freaking around the corner from him. And all this time he spends, especially with 9/11 happening and it delaying everything. And he's just like, the responsibility he feels, and then I think one of, if not the most satisfying moment of the movie is him slapping that paper down on the step of that house.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he didn't get enough. Like, I feel bad that I don't remember him as much because I don't know the actor, whereas I know all the other actors. The other, I think, most upsetting, and again, it's not scariest, but the victim who's talking about how the priest groomed him and took him out for ice cream, and then he refers to the ice cream melting down his arm like he didn't even eat his ice cream because he was so shocked and didn't know what to do. And it's just such a sad detail.
Yeah. Yes, also so sticky. I have a little bit of OCD personally, and I was just like, oof, thinking about the stickiness. Yeah. But obviously that's not the most horrifying aspect of that. But I have a note here too about Phil Saviano's description of grooming. I spent a large part of my career working for an organization that focuses on child well-being, etc. You take a lot of lessons about child safeguarding, and it's such a good elevator pitch, I guess, like a very quick, simple, easy description of how grooming occurs that Phil does in that first meeting. My jaw kind of dropped about it, being like, this is so perfectly illustrated you get to the point very quickly, and you also see how that transition happens from like attention to molestation, very graphic molestation, like in like a minute of speaking. It's a very, very, very good monologue, I have to say.
Yeah, Phil Saviano, the actor who played him, was great. I think, grooming a child for sexual abuse is always despicable, but there's an extra layer of horror when it comes from a priest who is presenting himself as the voice of God, an instrument of God, and manipulating the victim's values, beliefs, familial expectations. I mean, I grew up this way. You respect the church. You respect priests. You defer to them. You do what they say. This is not just any old man in a child's life. They've been trained to respect and defer to them. And that's an advantage that not every sexual predator has. And, that they targeted these vulnerable families. Like, I knew a priest who was accused of abusing children. I don't think I was ever going to be targeted. My mother was the teacher at the same school, right? He wouldn't have gone after me. But who knows who he went after and, what those families believed and whether or not they would be the type of family to put out cookies for the priest.
Yeah. And if I can share a personal anecdote. So I would have been a target. My parents were divorced. We were bankrupt. I was latchkey. There was no one around to watch me, and there were no older men in my life. And my mom spoke with the youth minister at our church and asked him to meet with me regularly so that I would have a positive male role model in my life. And I met with him, I don't know, weekly, bi-weekly, and I would just come with him on errands for the church. We just rode around in his car all the time. We went to Caldor, we went to the bagel place, we went to a soup, I don't even know how many hours I spent, but it was like my mom handed me over to this person that she trusted. And thankfully, nothing bad ever happened to me, but certainly it could have. He and his family moved away before I was an adult and before the Spotlight stuff came out. But I've thought so many times about how lucky I am that happened, because it's like Phil says, and like you were saying, it's not just physical abuse, it's spiritual abuse.
You're basically lucky that he just wasn't a predator, because if he was...
Without question, it's just luck of the draw.
Yeah. Ugh. Awful. Oh, another character I wanted to talk about was Joe. He's the gay guy that Sasha is interviewing. And that, I just found his story so sad. That he was being recognized at a time when you're not allowed to be gay. And so that made him feel validated. And then how that validation and affirmation was then manipulated to abuse him. And it's just so cruel and sad.
Yeah. And he mentions, by the way, that actor is also great on Only Murders in the Building. But
oh, yeah, that's what I recognize him from. Okay.
But yeah, he does mention, and it does give you a moment to be like, oh my God, a lot of these other men who are abused are not gay, so some of them even are like the guy who lives in Providence, having lives their wife doesn't even know, and their relationship to sex is not necessarily impacted in the same way. Not that they are not impacted psychologically in any way, but he does say to have that be my first sexual experience and to have my attraction be with men really impacted my life, my ability to have a relationship with men that is a trusting one, that is one that is free of fear, of horror, I don't know, of being taken advantage of.
Yeah. And it does talk about how, not everybody ends up anywhere near okay, that they reach for the bottle, the needle, or jump off a bridge.
Alive, yeah. Like a lot of them are not alive.
Well, I mean, obviously that is the most horrible thing, right? That they were abusing children. But the even deeper horror is the legal network that protected the powerful and that the system allowed it. I remember something you said about Herb Baumeister back in our Fox Hollow episode, A Bear is Gonna Bear.
Yeah.
Predators are going to prey on the vulnerable. But because they were clergy, because of Catholicism, the institution covered it up. I think a great quote in the movie is, "It takes a village to rape a child or abuse a child." I can't remember exactly what they said.
If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one as well.
Yeah. And you see this through the boys' networks playing golf, the Catholic charity events, the school alumni, and all the deals behind closed doors. We already talked about when the cardinal tries to manipulate Marty Barron by suggesting they work together. So it's not just the church. It's the lawyers, the politicians, the donors, and the journalists who didn't originally tell the story and were reluctant to take on the church.
The Germans, as Mark Ruffalo says, and they're all appalled by the comparison, but it's an accurate one.
Another deeper horror is, I think, the ongoing lack of accountability and justice that so many of these men who were abusing children in the 60s, 70s, they've died. So there's no way for those victims to, I guess, get that sense of closure. And did you know that Cardinal Law, the one depicted in this story as knowing about the abuse, ended up in Rome, heading up the church Santa Maria Maggiore, which is like this big, beautiful, prestigious historical church. So, the Catholic Church has made changes, but they're still dragging their feet on this and letting people get away with it. So that's just another thing that I think is really awful. Like, I looked up what Pope Francis's response was, and, he did apparently more than any other Catholic leader did in terms of doing what he could to put a stop to it. But I don't think he held everybody accountable who should have been held accountable.
No, I don't think so either. And it's really reflected in the movie. You have this sense of victory, the sense of like, they solved a problem. We got the bad guys. And then Mark Ruffalo looks in the conference room and sees 2 children in there. And Stanley Tucci is like, they were molested 2 weeks ago. Keep doing what you're doing. And then you get those, I don't know how many pages of cities. I remember the first time watching it just being in total, I'm starting to get choked up, like just seeing the screen change over and over and over. And you're just seeing all the countries in the world, all these cities across the US and countries everywhere. And you're just like, oh my God, how many victims? Boston is a small place for there to be over 1,000 victims,
Yeah. The scale of it is staggering. It's everywhere. I mean, we have stories here in Australia too, and I'll talk about that in one of the recommendations. But yeah, it's not just the kids they abused. It's the ongoing intergenerational trauma of what those kids then, how they treated their own families, and the ripple effect of this. It goes on and on and on.
Since you said intergenerational trauma, I love this learning I had. So I'm going to bastardize this slightly. There was a study that was done on rats, and let's say the rats were given strawberry juice and given an electric shock when they had the strawberry juice. And this study into intergenerational trauma discovered that not only did those rats' children react to strawberry juice with a trauma response, their children's children did. So like trauma literally changes your DNA, whether you are actually treating your children differently. You could be as buttoned up and seemingly put together as that guy in Providence who had lunch with Robbie. But your children have the ripple effect of the trauma you experience literally in their DNA. So yeah, when you think about that, it really is staggering how many people are impacted.
That's an amazing study. I hope they are doing a lot more research into that because, wow.
Yeah.
So it's not just emotional, it's DNA. Another thing I think an underlying theme is the sanitizing of language that we do when we talk about this stuff. Rachel McAdams' character Sasha really focuses on this. As difficult it is, she demands specificity when speaking with victims, like what exactly did he do to you? And this reminds me of, I don't know what it was, some podcast I listened to that talks about the term child porn. And it points out that child porn is sanitizing, right? Like we need to be saying child rape because that forces the imagery of what's actually happening. And we can't cope with that imagery.
Yeah, or child sex abuse, because pornography, that's a profession. People are doing that with acknowledgement and understanding of what's happening to them. So even if they're not actually raped, it is sexual abuse. Child porn doesn't exist because a child cannot consent.
True. Another underlying deeper horror, I think, is the decimation of journalism. Who is there to catch the corruption as these newspapers go under or get bought out by people with a certain bias? What has been missed because journalism is hobbled? And, investment in good journalism like Spotlight takes time. And the 24-hour news cycle just wants speed and headlines and clickbait.
Yeah, I found myself watching this with a lot of longing for this level of commitment to journalism and what it is and what it should be, and being tough with people who are pushing back for a greater good. I don't think really any of that happens today. So it is very bittersweet, I guess, to watch something like this.
I mean, I think on the other hand, that was a time of gatekeepers, right? One editor can be like, we're not going to go with this, and a story can be hidden. And now, if there's a story that needs to come out, there's other ways to get traction. And certain perspectives were really denied in previous decades, and those people can get their stories heard now. But on the other hand, to get those stories heard, they have to emerge from a sea of lies and conspiracy theories and fake news. And at least back then, we had a point of truth as a society that most of us agreed to trust. It was an incomplete truth, lacking certain perspectives, but we agreed on certain facts, and we respected the people who were supplying them.
There was something called journalistic integrity with things like having more than one source and all of that kind of stuff. I find there's a lot of good, beautiful things about the internet and social media. I think it's a great equalizer. Certainly, as I said, in the career that I had, there was so much opportunity that was provided to people that never could have existed without the internet and access to information. But it is very corruptible, and there are still gatekeepers, as we in America experienced the TikTok ban that was like less than 24 hours, but going over to Red Note and seeing what an actual government endorsed similar platform would be like and the regulations around what they can and can't say. So yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons to this fractured landscape.
Yeah. And I think, you talked about journalistic integrity. I think that still exists from certain people. Like, all the journalists I've met, my uncle, who's like the smartest, most sarcastic, cynical, but intelligent, dedicated person. Like he was awesome. And my aunt is the same way. Like she's whip smart. And, I've met some of their friends like Mike Stanton, who wrote the book, The Prince of Providence, about Buddy Cianci. Like all these people are smart. And I don't think they're evil and trying to manipulate people. So when I think of the people writing for, say, the New York Times, which, a lot of people on the conservative side would have contempt for as the elite Northeast liberal media, I think they're probably similar to the journalists I have met and the journalists depicted in Spotlight. They might have a bias, but I don't think they're selling outright lies.
There's a website called All Sides Media, which helps in terms of how the right reported on this issue, how the left reported on this issue, and this moderate response. I think the New York Times tends to have a lot of integrity, I think, in a lot of issues. In some issues, maybe not 100%. I think they might have a little bit of a lean. But in a lot of other things, I think you're right. It's always important to know where, like in Hamilton, follow the money and see where it goes. Like, where is the money coming from that funds this or that publication? And if that money source might have a bias on a topic, maybe learn about that topic from a source that doesn't have a bias related to that topic. You could do a little bit of a patchwork quilt in terms of your news sources for different topics.
Yeah, I think there would be a bias that would come out in what they're choosing to report on or not report on. But I think that the facts they present are probably going to be accurate.
They're not Fox News. They're not lying. They just might be illustrating and highlighting certain sides of a story and not others.
Yeah. Do you have any unanswered questions?
I mean, I went to Wikipedia, but I was interested to know what happened with Mike's marriage.
Okay.
And, I wouldn't say I researched this, but I've sort of been like, oh, how much has the Catholic Church really done about this? And I know that it's not as much as I would have liked because I also followed this issue in other series, etc. So I don't know that I have a ton. You?
My unanswered question is, okay, Richard Sipes says 6% of priests abuse. I would be interested in what the rate of sexual child predator is among just the average population of men. How high is it? I don't know. And he also says that 50% of the clergy is sexually active. So what that makes me wonder is, why is this happening in the priesthood? Is it that it's drawing people who are a bit off and have an unhealthy relationship with sex and are, maybe suppressing it and then end up acting out by abusing children? So is there something about the priesthood that attracts pedophiles? Or is there something about the way they are forced to live, this celibacy requirement that creates pedophiles? So that's something I want a deeper understanding of.
And without being an expert, I would say it's probably both. Just knowing the predators involved in other things like being teachers or, like you said, football coaches, gymnastics coaches, the predator's going to predator and they are going to find access to prey. But, Sipes' mention of this recognizable psychiatric phenomenon. The celibacy agreement clearly is not working for anyone. So, like, why is it there? I think one of the most eye-opening things for me with the Catholic faith and faith in general was learning that the whole Fish on Fridays thing was actually just an agreement between the fishmongers and the church to, like, help their business. And I was just sort of like, okay, so how much of this actually matters from a faith perspective if we know for a fact, and I'm being taught at a Jesuit school, that this is a BS agreement, but they're still doing it? Like, how much of this could be solved easily because it is not necessary?
Interesting. All right. What did we learn about survival?
In my mind, it is as much of a luck of the draw as my minister not assaulting me. Like, I don't know that it has anything to do with the individual and their strength or their ability to make it through adversity. You see that first victim, he's got needle marks in his arm. He's alive. That's by happenstance. I don't think we learned a ton about that, to be honest, other than luck.
I mean, as a parent, I would say don't leave your child alone with a priest and be very cautious of the adults you leave your child alone with. So when my daughter, I mentioned, was getting confirmed, which happens at a much earlier age here, like 8 or 9. In America, it's more like 15 or something. So there was this day retreat for the children. And I got in touch with the parish to be like, who's supervising? Will they be alone with the priest? And I felt awkward doing that. But I think this man has lost the right to the benefit of the doubt because of what his colleagues did, whether he was involved or not. I'm not leaving my kid alone with a priest. I would also say don't let suspicion of harm to a child go. Like, if you suspect or know about abuse, do something. Don't be Michael Keaton's character, Robbie, who buried the story. Don't be Joe Paterno. And pay for news if you can. I know not everyone can. Money's tight for everybody. But my aunt, my wonderful aunt, who I've mentioned a lot, the former photojournalist, she gifts me an annual subscription to the New York Times. And it's not just for Wordle. And I think it's one of the best gifts anyone gives me. I know I'm revealing my politics here for the 10th time in this episode, but I think paying for news allows good journalism to continue.
Totally agree. I recently left Facebook, which, we were seniors in college when our college was invited to join Facebook back when that was still a thing. And I very much was a very dedicated user of it with a very curated feed. But I have a loved one in my family who is trans, and it just became a toxic environment for me. So I left that and am paying for our local newspaper. And I am delighted every week when it comes. I love reading all, because that's really all I was using it for. I was using it to know what's happening in my community. I mean, sometimes the headlines are silly. Like last week it was Connecticut has more left-handed exits than most states in the region. Was a headline. It's not even like more than all in the country, more than all in the region, more than most in the region. But it's still, hopefully going to some hard-hitting journalism at some point.
Slow news day, huh?
Yeah, that happens.
I love reading the police report in my town because it's always just the stupidest thing. Like, teenagers walked past my house.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going on for about an hour now. What would you recommend as a palate cleanser?
Okay, so there are 2 people on TikTok who give me New England joy. One of them is Ian.Brownhill, and he does a lot of like New England states talking to each other and how New England feels about a season and all the stuff like that. And I love to share it with my friends. Annie and I have had lots of lively debates about whose state is better.
It's Rhode Island. There's no debate.
It's clear that among the states in New England, Connecticut is laughable at best as even being included. And then this guy's handle is grew up in New England, and he reviews movies, and he's just like brings up a DVD of a 2-sentence description of a Disney movie in a tough Boston accent. And every movie at the end, he says 5 stars. Like at the end of everyone.
They're great. Very funny.
So yeah, those are my 2 palate, because you need an extra palate cleanser for this topic.
The other palate cleanser I would recommend is the Seth Meyers Boston accent fake movie trailer. Have you seen that? It was like a late night skit, and it's just making fun of Boston accents. It's really funny. I'll link it in the show notes. It's great. Okay, If you like this, and I guess like is probably the wrong word, if you are interested in following up on more information regarding this, you could read the book Betrayal, The Crisis in the Catholic Church, which goes into a lot more details. I read about half of it a few years ago, and I actually stopped because it was just too depressing, because it was very repetitive. It was like, and then this priest did it, and then this priest did it, and then this priest did it, and it was depressing. So I stopped reading it, but it does go into more detail. Now, we mentioned that Phil Saviano said this is big. It's not just Boston. We reference the list in the credits of all the places, and that's very true. So if you want other movies, podcasts about this, they're really everywhere. A few I listen to include Case File, episode 34, which is about the Catholic mafia in rural Victoria and Australia. And there's just this similar coordinated effort to cover up predatory priests. And there's a detective in it who's a Catholic cop called Dennis Ryan, who would not let it go. And he reminded me of Jeff Jellison back in the Fox Hollow murders. So he was like, no, I'm not going to cover this up along with the rest of you. Then there's the podcast Surviving St. Michael's. Have you heard of that?
No.
So the first season, it's called Stolen, and the first season is about the murder of Indigenous women in Canada, and the second season is about the residential schools. So it's this investigative journalist. I'm forgetting her name. It's Connie something. And she has this personal connection because she's the daughter of a man who was sexually abused at a Catholic residential school in Saskatchewan. So she's dealing with her own generational trauma and trying to reconcile her relationship with her father, who was abusive, and her family pretty much had to, escape him. And then she's trying to uncover the truth of what happened to him. And it opens up, well, it was far, far, far more than just him. It's really sad, but it's also really beautiful about returning to culture and how that can provide some healing. I don't know if I'd recommend this to you personally, because last week you said you prefer documentaries and listening to things because you can't handle the reactions of the people who've experienced the horror. And this really, really goes into it. Like episode 4, I was practically in tears because it's just her interviews with all these elderly voices who are saying, like, well, this is what happened on my first day, and this is how old I was, and this was the first time this happened. And it is really confronting. But I also think it's really important because even if you take the physical and sexual abuse out of this story, which is so rampant, it's just so tragic and upsetting because these kids were separated from their families at like 5 or 6. Their cultures erased. If they had braids, they were cut. They weren't allowed to speak their native Cree language. And in the case of this story, the loss of identity, loneliness, starvation, dehumanization. And it was all done by the Catholic Church.
We should definitely do something with the residential schools at some point, because that is definitely a topic that is only recently, I think, getting a quarter of the recognition that it deserves.
Well, this is a great one for it, but it is emotionally confronting. But it's also really beautiful and empathetic. And I think the fact that it is the daughter of a victim telling the story and giving it that personal connection, it was an amazing podcast. The Keepers as well. We've talked about that in the past. The movie Zodiac has a similar investigation vibe to me, even though it's police officers, not journalists.
And less satisfying.
Much less satisfying, yeah. Another movie that came to mind was Primal Fear. Do you remember that with Ed Norton?
Mm-hmm.
And that actually has a sex abuse in the clergy thing. And that was in 1996. So this was years before the Spotlight team uncovered this and the Catholic clergy sexual abuse thing blew up. So I thought that was interesting that that movie had that as an underlying theme. Great movie in general. Baby Reindeer, we've mentioned that in relation to stalking, but it's also about sexual abuse. As we mentioned earlier, The Wire Season 5, to see the director of Spotlight play a dishonest journalist. My Uncle Bill always said it was the best show on TV, and I agree. Another Boston movie, Mystic River, which is also linked to the long-term impact of sexual abuse, also set in Boston. Have we mentioned the book Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow?
Oh my God, what a good book that was.
What a good book. Yeah. So that and the documentary Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, both about big, powerful webs of secrets and cover-ups. And both of these are making me think, we need to outlaw NDAs.
Yeah, I would agree.
And then for a few fun ones, if you're feeling depressed by the thought of all these movies and books I've just mentioned, Mean Girls, because of Rachel McAdams. And it's so fun to go back and watch that.
Absolutely. Can I add another fun one? Newsies.
Newsies!
Journalistic underdogs. Bill Pullman is best.
Yeah. Interesting you bring up Newsies because Joseph Pulitzer is the villain in that, and the Spotlight reporters won the Pulitzer Prize.
Sorry, you can cut this out if you want to, but one of the podcasters on True Crime Obsessed, one of my favorite podcasts, she thought it was called the Pulitzer Prize. Every time I hear, it's like, that's so adorable. I think she was like a teenager before they found out. Anyway.
That's so cute. It's the prize. It sounds like it would just be chance.
Exactly. You won the Pulitzer Prize.
And my last recommendation is Scream, to see Liev Schreiber in the first role I ever saw him in. He's the at least accused murderer.
What is his name? Something like Sugar. What is his name again?
Isn't it Cotton?
Cotton Weary.
Cotton Weary.
Yeah,
yes.
that was that was my first exposure to him as well. And then when I was living in New York, he did Shakespeare in the Park, and I saw him. He was great. Yeah,
I bet he would be.
I was going to say The Keepers, Newsies. I wish I had thought of Catch and Kill because that book was incredible. I absolutely loved it. So also highly recommend that. Yeah, a lot of great recommendations there, Annie.
All right. Your homework assignment is to watch Michael Flanagan's Netflix series, Midnight Mass. This is a horror series. There's 7 episodes, but it's, connected to Catholicism. I promise after that we'll get away from Catholicism because that's kind of 3 episodes in a row. But I thought about giving you The Exorcist as homework, but I thought maybe we need to work up to that with you, even if it would finally teach you to take Ouija boards seriously. And I'm going to give you my recommendation for, 6 weeks from now is Stephen King's first novel, Carrie. So I just wanted to flag that now. We'll do a true crime recommendation from Caroline in between Midnight Mass and Carrie, but in case you are a slow reader or need to wait for a library hold to come in, I wanted to give everybody time.
I'm really excited to read Carrie. I've never read it. I'm very excited.
Oh, good. This will be my 3rd go of it, I think. And maybe we should watch, the 70s movie and then the more recent one along with it.
I've also never seen the movie. Like, honestly, my only association with Carrie is when Andrea shows up to the 90210 prom, and she's like, "You said you liked me."
Oh, no. Well, now you'll know where that came from. It will give you a whole new appreciation for 90210.
Like I needed one.
Thanks for listening. Please do all the things podcasters ask you to do. Tell a friend, write a review on iTunes. You can email us at drawntodarknesspod@gmail.com. And if, like Shirley Jackson, you delight in what you fear, join us here again in 2 weeks at Drawn to Darkness. Special thanks to Nancy Azzano for our cover art. You can find her on Facebook at Nancy Azzano Art, and Harry Kidd for our intro and outro music. You can find him on Spotify.